Hello and welcome to this video. On this video, I'm going to be going through the history of drums. I've done two of these videos before, and they've always been very successful, and people have always enjoyed them because I think it's a history which some of us drummers know, but in the wider sort of culture, it's not so well known. But what's interesting is we could see the invention of the drum kit as being the beginning of popular music, and for a certain time all the innovations that happened on the drums seem to underpin a lot of the innovations that happened in the wider music styles. Many of the music styles seem to be based in the rhythms that come from the drum kit. More recently, we've seen the move over to more machine rhythms. But of course, those early drum machines were designed to sound like a drum kit. And so the rhythmical vocabulary now of modern hip-hop and electronic music is still based within the sounds that come from this instrument, or to be more accurate, this collection of instruments. Because what the drum kit is a collection of instruments that have been brought together. And this bringing together of these instruments happened at the end of the 19th century in New Orleans. It really can be seen as the thing that marks the beginning of jazz as a group activity, a group music, rather than a marching band music. So the origins of this start in the marching bands, okay? So what we have here is fundamentally a snare drum. This is my snare drum here. And the snare drum actually has wires, like a snare that you would snare a rabbit with. There's wires under here. And when I put that on there, that tightens the snare up against the bottom drum head. So when I hit the top drum head, it rattles those snares, and it gives us a very percussive, loud, almost like bullet sound. Here is without the snares, and here it is with the snares. So this sound here really underpins warfare. When we start to go back into the history of drums, whether we look at the techniques of 20th century drumming, which is rooted in, I would say, Molar technique, which was a technique of playing drums that was outlined by a guy called Sanford Molar in the 1920s. But he'd really based it upon some of the drummers that he saw that had been drumming in the military bands that were around in the Civil War. In my country, if you start looking at the techniques of drumming and you go back through the patterns, you will start to get to the English Civil War. So this instrument here is a noise-making device. It's a drum, but a very loud, snappy drum that's there to scare people and to rally your own troops and give them the chutzpah to go walking forth, and face death. So this instrument becomes the centre of marching music. So we are very familiar with this sort of sound. Now, you could back that up in a marching band with the bass drum. The guy with the big bass drum, and he's got that on his chest, he's banging it on both sides. And here we've got the bass drum down here. So we put those two sounds together, we get this. Also in a marching band, you might have the guys clashing the cymbals together. On a drum kit, that is mimicked with a thing called the hi-hat. This machine here, which is pedal operated, I could open my hi-hats and then clash them together to get that sound. So what the drum kit is, essentially, is a bass drum, a snare drum, a hi-hats. These are the three main instruments, and these have been structured in a way so one person can mimic a marching band with three drummers. So it's one person mimicking three people, which of course now requires you playing with all your limbs and coordinating like this. Now, the guy that did that was not a marching musician. He wasn't in a military band. It was a jazz musician. It was a jazz musician called D.D. Chandler. And what he basically did was he built a bass drum pedal, right? Because some guys were trying to play this at the same time, and they used to kick it. That's why it got to the name of the kick drum. But I would say in my list of 10 things that created popular music from the drum kit, that's a clumsy title, Andy. What are we going to call this video? 10 drum kit innovations that shaped all music. It'll be something like that. I would say the very first one is D.D. Chandler inventing the kick pedal. So he was literally playing just the snare drum and the bass drum. Now, we have no idea what he sounded like because there's no recordings from that period. Jazz doesn't get recorded till 1917, and by that time you had 20 years for whatever they were doing to develop, and we don't know where it comes from or what was going on or what the influences really are on it. But we can see these are sort of marching instruments from a marching band. Cymbals were used in orchestral music, Western European orchestral music, but obviously these come from China and Asia. And the early cymbals were quite small. The idea of having all these different cymbals here, which are basically percussion effects, you know. That type of sound that you will hear in orchestral percussion. And they're not there for rhythmical purposes, they're more there for colour. But what happens is drummers start to play these cymbals, and the bringing together of metallic percussion instruments with, you know, membramophone or whatever they're called, you know, drums, things with resonating drum heads, which were originally animal skins stretched across, you know, a tree trunk or whatever. This is the first time we see the metals and wood brought together in this way. So, looking at the turn of the 20th century, we can see that the drum kit's in place. That creates static bands. And static bands now are going to become the dominant sound in the south of America. D.D. Chandler's the guy that I would put there, and it changed the nature of these bands. By the time the original Dixieland Jazz Band is recorded in 1917, we have a sit-down group. We have a group of musicians, not a string quartet or someone with a piano singing. We have a rhythm section. Now, the rhythm section takes a while to be developed because those early drummers are just basically, they are playing the improvised swinging march music that jazz was. Ton of improvisation. And I said the word swinging there, you see, and that's an interesting word. So I'm now going to try and move on to the next important development, which is the development of swing. I don't like the word swing. Swing, to me as a drummer, means that we're playing from a triplet bass. So the music's based in threes, not fours or twos. A lot of military music is in 2/4, but it's straight. So it goes 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1. Now, tripleted music or compound music is based upon threes. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. And I got a lot of laughs when I went on another podcast and said to primarily an audience that believes that everything that was created in popular music came from the black community in New Orleans, that I said swing in that sense exists in all music. And I said the fact that Humpty Dumpty swings. So Humpty Dumpty swinging because it's in 3. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3. Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All looking horses and all looking men. All put them together again. Now I'm not adding any sort of groove in there. I'm playing a triplet based pattern. Right, so I think the swinginess was inherent in marching music in early jazz, but there is a sense of groove there, and I think, me personally, there is the elements of African music, but they're coming in it's right deep in the genes of this music. I also think a lot of it comes from Latin American music and the 3-3-2 rhythm, which is basically this rhythm. 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2. That's a very static example of that. If we syncopate that, we would get a pattern like this. So those sorts of rhythms, they obviously sound a lot more Latin American than they do African, but those rhythms are related. It's basically a great big mix. But African music does something else. Now, I'm going to put forth two theories that are mine now that I think could explain where swing comes from, and they're quite complex. The first is the fact of this thing called Molar technique. Molar technique was a drum technique that Sanford Molar observed in drummers, old drummers in old people's homes that were sat, doing all their stuff on the porch or whatever old people's home. And he'd go up and say, "What are you doing?" And he'd show them the techniques they were using. And it's quite a strange technique where rather than gripping at the front here like a normal drummer would nowadays, they were gripping from the back, and so they had this sort of thing going on. It was loose here, and a lot of it was to do with the wrist, and the wrist following the bounce of the stick. The stick wants to bounce. You see the stick? Now those three rhythms there, those three beats, I'm not playing. That's the stick bouncing. And if I then just drop that in a syncopated fashion, so syncopation was where we put the accents rather on 1 and 3, we're putting it on 2 and 4. Although a lot of this early jazz was in 2/4, so it's basically rather than putting it on the 1, you put it on the 2. I think that's a simpler way of explaining it for non-musicians. So not syncopated would be like this: 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. Whereas syncopated would be this: 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. If we put the bass drum on the 1 and then our upbeat here on the snare drum, our main beat on 2, we get the fundamental beat of all 20th century music. 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2 1. But if I now hit that as a syncopated beat and just let the stick bounce, you get this. Now, I'm controlling that a little bit with my fingers, but the actual sound there is just the bounce. And so I think if you were playing for a long time and hitting on syncopated beats and your hand technique was good, which remember that was always there, all the early drummers we look at like Baby Dodds and Big Sip Catlett, their snare drum chops is incredible. And there is, I believe, something lost in the art of those early drummers. When you look at a lot of the early drummers, because they come through vaudeville, because they come through also playing in little cinema shows, film shows, there's a whole history there that you can uncover. The vaudeville thing meant there was a lot of stick tricks. A lot of those early drummers were able to do, I can't do it because I'm a modern drummer. There's many guys around who can, but they're doing a lot of stick tricks. And when you look at the drum kits and you look at the wear on these early drummers, you usually get a little black spot right in the middle because they are so accurate. And that accuracy, when you see it, is a sign of the stick doing its own thing rather than playing it with your hands. So I think that's a big part of the swing feel. But if you imagine that there in America is this inherited idea of black American music coming from Africa. There's the dim memory of Congo Square that had happened like 50 years before the development of all this. And we also saw at the same time as Congo Square the development of minstrel music, right? Now, if I wanted to mimic African music, I would go to a staple of African music, which is the 3/2 polyrhythm. The 3/2 polyrhythm is not the same as a 3/3/2 clave. 3/3/2 clave, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2. It's a rhythm. Now we hear this rhythm in early Jelly Roll Morton, early Louis Armstrong tunes, where it goes. And this rhythm is really prevalent in early jazz right from the beginning. So you would get arrangements that start like that. They go. And this rhythm I'm playing here, I'm basically playing downbeat, and then letting the sticks drop, and then adding into that lots of how could we describe it? You know, snare drum rudiments that come from military drumming. So that's where I think it's coming from. But there's a something, and I've never mentioned this on the channel before, and it's a hard thing to explain. A 3/2 polyrhythm is something else, right? That means we are playing 3 beats in the space of 2. It's quite a hard thing to imagine. Here's 2 beats on my bass drum. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now, what would 3 beats at the same time as that, riding over the top of that, sound like? So if you take the 1 there, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is actually hinting at 2 different tempos. We've got this tempo, bang, 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 and you got this tempo, ba, 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 ba. 2 tempos existing at the same time. It's a fascinating thing. Now, I think when people feel a groove or a swing or some sort of dancey pulse, it's because they feel the beat very strong, but also there's a hint of other rhythms going on which are counter to that, and that gives you a funny feeling in your body. It sort of pushes you into a strange place where you're bobbing along, but you're aware there's something else, and that sort of we could call it dialectic. It's a little bit like a joke, actually, that you've got 2 conflicting things coming your way. And that is the thing that makes music great. It's like country music being sad in the lyrics and happy in the chords. There is always in music something that has to get in there to make it compelling. And rhythmically, it's the idea of another rhythm existing at the same time, or even another tempo. Right now, in African music, that 3/2 polyrhythm would sound like this. And you can play this. I'm going to get you guys to play this. So the way we can play this, if we take 2 limbs, right? What I want you to do is think of this rhythm. It's in 3, and it goes like this. 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. Now we're going to play that with our hands on our knees, right? Everyone, after 3. 1, 2, 3. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. You all doing it? Yeah, group participation. Didn't expect this. Da, 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 da. Now, that's a very simple rhythm, but we're going to now put it onto our limbs. Now, the way limbs work is really interesting. No one's ever discussed this in terms of rhythms, but we now can go both, right, left, right. Very simple rhythm. Both, right, left, right. Both, right, left, right. Both, right, left, right. If you all got that after 3, 1, 2, 3, both, right, left, right. Both, right, left, right. Both, right, left, right. Keep it going. Now, you will notice that your right hand, if you're right-handed, well, you've got to be, because that's the way I told you to play it, will be going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And at the same time, your left hand is playing a counter tempo. Not a counter rhythm, a counter tempo. It's going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. It's slower than the ba da 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 da. Now let's put those onto my toms here and play that. See what that sounds like. I'm going to speed that up, put the bass drum, and I'm going to exaggerate the two aspects. So this will be now compound time. I have to hit this. Now, I'm sure you're listening to that going, that doesn't sound Latin American, and it doesn't sound like jazz. That sounds like African music. This is the rhythm that a lot of African music is based upon, and it doesn't make sense until you syncopate it. So rather than dropping this straight on like this, I'm going to syncopate it by dropping it a little bit after, so it's dropped on the upbeat. This is where it gets complex, and that's why this rhythm is complex. So I go. And what I'm going to do to transform this, I am going to take that rhythm, right? I am going to sort of take you from a journey from this sort of idealized minstrel idea of what African rhythms were, put through, a dim memory of Congo Square. Then we're going to put it onto the snare drum and see what that sounds like. Are you ready? You'll notice that has a certain lope to it, which I'm not putting anything into this in terms of feel at all. I am just playing it mathematically. If you program this into a computer, it would sound like that, except it would be without my sort of human wobbly aboutness. But I'm trying to play it as solid as I can. Let's speed this up. Now that rhythm, now on the snare drum, starts to turn into a... And we get the swing rhythm. Now, these are my theories. These are not things that you will find in another book. If you want to start throwing information from somewhere else, you won't get this. I am just offering this into the discussion. That is where I think the swing rhythm comes from. And it's really embedded in the way drummers play and the relaxation that is required to play the drums, right? So we then have to look at how this becomes a swing rhythm, right? As we know it, because we know jazz doesn't go like this. All that stuff is really early jazz. We know that jazz goes... That's your jazz rhythm. And the question is, how does that rhythm underpin rock music and funk and soul? What's the actual thing that happens? How does this happen? I'm trying to go through these 10 steps here. I'm going to go to my notes. So, yeah, I'm only on to number 2, but I knew that first one would be a hard thing to describe. So, the hi-hats, as I mentioned, weren't there to start off with. This device wasn't invented until the 1920s. Now, one of the things is it was designed to be operated by the foot and just... You would have a foot-operated sound, much like the bass drum. Originally, these hi-hat stands were called low boys, and the hi-hats were down low. And drummers being... And this is the whole thing about the history of popular music. It's drummers thinking, oh, can I play? What sound can I get? And us drummers were always trying to get weird sounds out of it. So they started to play this. Now, when you play this, if it's shut, you get a nice, very quiet but trebly, so it penetrates a tight sound. If we open it, we get that, and then we can mix that up. And then drummers who were used to doing stick tricks, holding the sticks like this, realised that they could hold that, play underneath it, which I'm not very good at. I wish I could do all these tricks for you, and I'm not very good at them. But they started to find that this was a very expressive instrument. Now, the problem they had is in the recording studios at the time, because we didn't really have a microphone till 1925. So the cylinder recording, which was a needle in a groove, that method would jump with any loud sound. So obviously the drum kit going... Now, I'm sure Baby Dodds and Big Sick Catlett and all those guys in the early days played like that, but when they got to the recording, they were told to do something else. Now, Baby Dodds, a very early drummer, he'd come from the cinema shows, so he had a bunch of things with him, cowbells, whistles, all sorts of different things, contraptions to make sound. And sometimes they would play on the coconuts. You know, this is where the term traps comes from the kit. It comes from contraptions, but the static nature of the drummer now being sat there and not having to move around, the idea that in a marching band you would have the marching instruments plus trombone, clarinet, and cornet or tuba clarinet, that front line, something shifts, because at the same time this is going on in the sort of clubs and bars in the South, you've got boogie woogie piano players. The piano is static, it's in a room. So now a drummer is rocking up next to a pianist and playing with them. This is the beginning of the rhythm section. Because of the volume things you've got going on there, this rhythm... that gets moved over to the hi-hats here. And they start to mess around with it. And you start to get this. Joe Jones is the guy that really codifies this way of playing, of having that on the hi-hat there. With the light feather in the bass drum, the double bass starts to emerge. That's not there on the early jazz recordings. And that bass drum is there now, is feathering rather than doing a big sort of brass band. It's feathering and just joining with the walking bass lines. You got boo doo doo doo. The swing drummers are basically, that's their rhythm there. And then the band would be going ba-da, and they would then do that with a snare drum. And that's the style of Joe Jones. I believe Joe Jones to be the greatest drummer in history because of his influence, but also the incredible virtuosity in which he does pull this all together. And I'm not questioning that. It's not just about doing it. It's the artistry with which the drummers did this. So we now have this swing rhythm. By the time we get to bebop, they have moved this to the ride cymbal. I don't think the early drummers even had a ride cymbal, but they got a bigger cymbal, right? They would keep now the backbeat here on this hi-hat, leaving the bass drum and the snare drum to sort of punctuate against the hits of the melody or the what the soloist is doing. There's a certain freedom that comes into drums. The guy that really develops is Kenny Clark, and then you get Max Roach come out, but it's this sort of thing. It's that style of drumming, and that's jazz drumming. And I know you all watch and go, yeah, we didn't come for that. And I've explained all this on other videos. Now it starts to get interesting. With the dissolution of the swing bands in the 40s because of the war, for a whole variety of reasons, a lot of the musicians have gone away to war. There was certain recording bands that happened. When you come down out of the bebop era at the end of the war, you get two music styles. They go two different ways. You get bebop, which goes into hard bop, West Coast jazz. That's the whole jazz history, but we're not going to be looking at that one today. We're going to be looking at another line, which goes into the rhythm of blues bands like Louis Jordan. And what happens is, and I'm going to give this to Earl Palmer, Earl Palmer starts to move the backbeat of the swing onto here. So rather than going, or he does this. Now, this is a jazz swing beat, but this is the one that we hear on all that rock and roll stuff. Remember I said that we got that Spanish influence, which is not swung. We have the influence of boogie-woogie pianists that are coming into the music in the 1920s and 30s. And this becomes a really big thing. Now, the boogie-woogie pianists are not playing swung, they're playing straight. It's like... So you suddenly have this straight feel. And when you listen in the 50s to various drummers seeing how they negotiate this, sometimes you'll have a piano playing straight, while the band goes... And you get all these straight, weird rhythms. Now, I'm going to put it with Earl Palmer as well, because he starts to straighten it out. I think Ray Charles' band starts to straighten it out. We can really hear it in the early music with Fats Domino. Although it's tripleted, we see the move towards a more boogie-woogie piano player with Jerry Lee Lewis. So now we get this... Now, this sort of motoring, double-handed way of playing is really, really hard. It's a forgotten art. Drummers started to accentuate those rhythms with their left hand. In the 50s, maybe the 40s, we get the development of the Texas shuffle, which is like a swing, but you're backing it with your left hand. There's so many different shuffles. You've got the Oklahoma shuffle. You've got the flat tire shuffle. I think the flat tire shuffle's this one or the Oklahoma. I can't remember, but this is one of my favourites. When I played with Ian Parker back in the old days, I had to do loads of shuffles. This was one of my favourites. So these are all your swinging shuffle feels, and then you have these. Now, the question is, how does this turn into this? All the drummers at this time are messing around with this idea. The straightness is there, but a lot of the straightness is being played, as I said, with both hands. If you think of something like Something Else by Eddie Cochran, she's sure fine looking for her, she's something else. That sound, it's the feel that John Bonham goes back to when he does rock and roll. So where does this backbeat come from? Well, I think part of it comes from the influx of folk music in the early 60s, Bob Dylan, which is much more, you know... So there's a whole history of drumming in country music where, you know, country musicians would often play like this sort of rhythm. You know, that's the same rhythm. Now, this is really interesting, this is, because in my notes, I think what made the backbeat so popular came from Ringo Starr. Ringo Starr, if you listen to their first single, Love Me Do, he's played a backbeat. Love me do, you know, I love you. You know, this sort of thing. I love. Now that's swung. But he's played it straighter. It's quite interesting. It's really hard to explain where this comes from. I'm going to try and just go for it. Think about what's especially happening in the music of Ray Charles, right? And you think about that shuffle beat, and we're saying at some point drummers left it behind and moved to this straight beat that we hear in rock music. I don't think that's the case. Listen to this. Now, what I want you to do is keep that feel going in your head. Now, you're feeling that swung. You feel that as funky, even though I'm just going... Because we're feeling... So... When I used to try and teach feel to students, I would teach them that 3/2 polyrhythm and get that in their system. I would then get them to syncopate it. I would then get them to play it on the drums, get it up to speed, bring the molar technique in. This is a lot of stuff to take on board, mine. Bring the molar technique in, and then once you've got that feel in your body, you feel that whilst you play. Now here, because we now have our backbeat here, we have the time here like Joe Jones, where does the expression come from? The expression now comes from the bass drum. Up until this point, the bass drum is really just going through everything. It's just always just keeping time like that the whole time. In the 60s, at some point, we get this. Now, this innovation, I am going to give to, and because we don't really know, but in my studies, I'm going to give it to Bobby Elliott, an incredible drummer, British drummer, that played in the Hollies. And he turned up to a recording session, I think 64, 65. Have I got in my notes which one it was? Yeah, I've got it here, because I won't be able to remember this. So, this is a very important session. EMI Studios, that'll be Abbey Road. Bobby Elliott of the Hollies nagged Don Richards, the engineer and A&R guy, to put a microphone in his bass drum on the tune Stay. Right? They put an extra microphone in the bass drum. Now, suddenly that becomes really important. Now, once you start to do that, you can go back to all these bebop licks, you know, all that interplay between the snare drum and the bass drum. We now straighten out, keep the time here, and we get... That innovation, and I think it's a whole bunch of things I'm pulling together that make that happen, okay? Now, what's the next thing? What's the next innovation? 1967, James Brown. He's a soul artist. You know, a lot of his stuff's in 6/8, you know. This is basically a slow swing, you know. Please! 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 You know, that's what James Brown is doing, you know, and a little bit of, you know... Which again is that sort of 16th note boogie woogie type of rhythm. A really interesting track from the early 60s by James Brown is Think. Think is one of those tracks where half the band is still swinging and half the band isn't. There is an incredible lilt. I think it's these lilts that really create this thing where we go, oh, swing's a mystery. And the mystery is it's these pulls that exist. In other words, people aren't playing all the same things. It's not right, but it's not right in a compelling way. Now, in 1967, James Brown turned up to a recording session, and his band was in there jamming on So What. But rather than going, so what, this is by Miles Davis. So what, they'd funk it up, so they go, Clyde Stubblefield on the drums did this thing where he starts to displace the rhythm. He takes these 16th notes, and rather than syncopating the backbeat, he starts to syncopate the bloody basic 16th note structure of the rhythm. So if you imagine you going... Now I'm just going to... I'm literally picking the beat up and dropping it in a new place. And he was doing that on this version of So What that the James Brown was playing. But, and old James, he recognised something's going on. So he goes up to the microphone. He starts to sing, instead of So What, he starts to sing Cold Sweat. And we get this rhythm. I'm not playing this exactly right. The reason is because when I heard Cold Sweat, I personally was so influenced by it that I think that it's like most of my drumming is based around that. All that stuff I'm doing there, the feel that I have is coming from Cold Sweat. If you want to really know how to play with feel, listen to the tracks that have feel, put them into your body, and then play them. So when I'm playing that, I'm hearing bum, ba-da, bum, ba-chicka, bum, bag, digga, bum, digga, bum, ba-da, dum, ba-digga. Doesn't matter what you do once you've got that in your head. Bum, ba-da, ba-digga, bum, ba-da. And I'm not even hitting the drums right, but it sounds right because the groove pulls it together. So the James Brown rhythm section in 1967 with the track Cold Sweat, for me, reinvents the wheel. Right, where's me notes? Right, so the next innovation I've got rhythmically would be DJ Kool Herc in the 70s getting two turntables, taking those James Brown rhythms and playing them back to back. So what he starts to do is he's taking a drum break here, playing it on a record, and when it gets to the end of that drum break, he's switching that turntable off and switching the output to the next turntable here, which he has lined up at the beginning, and then he lets that go, and that one plays the rhythm. So you get a sort of... and they transform it, and they just knock the fader. And this meant that a DJ could now extend these drum beats, right? Now, we know that sound, we know that sampled sound, but I think in the 1980s, drummers who before, if you think of someone like Mitch Mitchell or John Bonham, or whatever, the 70s drummers would be playing like this. Not always. There were minimal drummers like Simon Kirk from Free, but it's a very opulent sort of rolling pattern. When the drum machines and the sampling starts to come in, us drummers had to start to now play in a much more loopy way. So that would be like this. So here's my... And in the 80s, the backbeat and the way they were programming drum machines as well meant that a lot of the expression now moves back to the hi-hats. So you would get a beat like this. And then the drummer would decorate it with the hi-hat. A lot of drum machines, if you think of like I Feel For You by Shaka Khan, we get... Right, Right, so now we see the drummers are sort of following what is going on in electronic music, and they're mirroring each other. The drum machines are trying to sound like the drummers, and the drummers are starting to sound like the drum machines, the samplers, or whatever it is. And we now get to a point in this video, because I have actually gone through all of these. We have done 9. I've done it very haphazardly. We have done 9 sort of innovations where the drums have sort of driven the direction of popular music. Now, there's all the different styles. They all sorts of relate. If you think of the sort of rock and roll beat, that survives in punk, where people return to something that's simpler, sort of that sort of sound, and that gets faster and faster. We can bring the double bass drummers in. The double bass drums historically are coming from Louis Bellson, who played them in the Duke Ellington Orchestra. He really came up with that idea. A lot of the British rock drummers in the 60s had grown up listening to Gene Krupa, who's another really influential drummer. Gene Krupa is really responsible for getting rid of all the coconuts and stuff and having this sort of these tom-toms here, and that could have easily got on the list. The whole history of double bass drum, I could do a whole video on this. It's very, very interesting. And again, those early double bass drum patterns that you hear Billy Cobham doing and Louis Bellson doing, Ginger Baker, are often swung. The development of double bass drumming happens actually very slowly. There's almost like a disbelief in what you could do with your feet. Now, of course, with metal drummers, it's become a complete art form, as had things like blast beats, which really emerged in the 1980s with, I would say, with Charlie Benante from Anthrax, who was going, you know, and then you get, and now we get this sort of, you know, which I'm playing with a double kick. Some drummers will not play it with a double kick. So there's all these different rhythms going around. You know, there's a history of ska. Ska is, again, a reaction to American jazz, wafting its way through the radio waves down into the West Indies, and people start, you know, that's a swung beat, but it's a ska beat, and it's all based upon swing. It's all based upon jazz. The disco beat, which emerges in the 70s. Again, it's the technology of the hi-hat. It's an adaptation of... Imagine that type of swing beat. And as soon as I do that there, you can hear a shift in the feel. Right, so we're really at the end of this video. I think I've done as much as I can today. I want to come back and really explore a lot of the things that I have learned from playing the drums, and also studying the history of drums, and then comparing it to the sort of standard history of jazz or rock or blues, and realising all the discrepancies that are there. But before we go, I just want to explore the drum kit a little bit more for you novices who don't understand what's going on. A drum kit, as I said, has got my snare drum. It has got, you could take the snares off and on, like this. This gives me 3 basic sounds: snares on, snares off. Then I could do a rim click, which isn't really greatly affected by having the snares on. There is also a thing called a rim shot, which is where you hit the... I've been doing a lot of them today for some reason. I didn't want to. You hit the snare smack in the middle and smack on the side of the stick hits the metal at the same. So see there, I'm just hitting the metal. Now if I bring the angle down a bit, we get a rim shot. as opposed to not rip-shotted, rip-shotted. So that is a number of sounds, but the sounds that are possible with the snare drum, if I just start to explore it, so drummers are always trying, this is the nature of percussion, they're always trying to find different sounds. Obviously, with a hi-hat, I said that there's an open sound, a closed sound, this chip, you can slash it. But there's another sound that I use quite a lot, which is called a flange. When you flange the hi-hat, it's when you get an open sound with your heel. It sounds slightly different. So say if I was to go, I can now get that open hi-hat sound, and then I can play rhythms over the top of that. See, if I've sat a little bit closer. So that's the snare drum. The bass drum, as I said, the big innovation with the bass drum is the double kick, and that's like needs a whole separate video. But you could play rapid 16th notes with the feet, getting these sorts of. I, being an older drummer, have had to more recently develop that. That's happened much more recently in the history of drumming. So the double kick has affected things. The toms have pretty much stayed the same. The fashion seems to dictate that they go deep and long and then they go short, and the amount you have. But the cymbals are interesting. I haven't got all the range of cymbals, but these are hi-hat cymbals. This is a splash cymbals, early jazz drummers had splashes. They were like standard on swing drummers. And then somewhere in the 50s, 60s, people stopped playing them. And then the great Stuart Copeland brought them back into his sound. Okay. We've got standard crash cymbals, which have a much more white nose, shushy sound, and then we have a ride cymbal, which has more of a dingy sound. I am playing this beast, and my cymbals here are Dream cymbals. This is a vintage Bliss Ride 24-inch. It's a beast. I like to feel the weight. I like to feel the power over on my ride cymbal. But that's an incredible sound. I have just ordered a flat ride from Dream. It's the Paul Vertigo signature ride. And when I get it, I want to utilize it in a video that shows how drums are recorded, how they work acoustically, how that sits into the mix. But I think we're done. So this is going to be the end of the video. Thanks for watching this one. Hope you enjoyed it. These ones seem to do well, so I hope this one does well, because I like doing these and I can do more of them. But they do require a lot of work to get all the bloody cameras synced and the audio and do a drum mix and all that nonsense. So, if you want to support me doing all that, you can put a like on this video, or even subscribe. If you haven't subscribed, you can become a Patreon member, or even a paid up Patreon member. But you can become a free member of Patreon and watch a lot of these videos ad-free before they come out on the main channel, as you can if you become a member here, and a few exclusive stuff. And if you go to the lower tier membership here, you will get a whole bunch of drum stuff. I try and do one every week. So we're done. Thanks for watching. See you on the next video.